What's up guys, this is Rafa. I know I'm super late to make this video. I feel like ever since I started doing these wrap-ups, the months have just been flying by so fast. Like, how are we already in the middle of March? I feel like 2024 just started. But February was such a fun reading month for me. I read so many good 4-star books, and one book that might possibly be my favorite of the year so far, so I really wanted to share them with you guys. Right at the beginning of the month, I read 5 Total Strangers by Natalie D. Richards. This is about a girl whose connecting flight gets canceled because of a blizzard, so she has to get into a carpooling situation with 4 strangers. But everyone in this car is really sketchy, and like I said, there's a blizzard happening, so the roads are really dangerous. Most of this book, they're just driving, and nothing really related to the main mystery is happening, but despite that, I really enjoyed this book, and I was flying through it really fast until I got like 80% in, when I was finally like, okay, let's hurry this up. And around that time, I was also getting tired of all the fighting. The characters in this fight constantly, and I was just kind of getting over it at that point. This was like a 3-star book for me, I think. I feel like it was a really fun concept, and I really did enjoy the first half of this book, but after a while I was just kind of over it. And the main mystery is just kind of underwhelming when we finally get to it, which took forever, and I was just kind of left a little disappointed. The next book I read this month is probably the most popular one on this list, and that's The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I've heard so many good things about this book for years, so I'm glad I finally got to read it this month. But I am kind of mad at you guys, especially the people on Book Talk, because that's where I posted I was gonna read this book, and not a single person mentioned how sad this book was. I cried pretty much through the whole last half of this book, I'm not even gonna lie. I think I was expecting like wholesome or funny going into this. I mean, to be honest, I didn't really know what I was getting into at all with this book, because all I knew was that it was written like a fictional memoir about an old Hollywood star, but I did not expect to be so stressed out that I had to step away a few times while reading this. It took me way too long to get through this book because it can be kind of sad at times, and it deals with some really hard subjects. So if you haven't read this book yet and you've been wanting to, you've been warned. This book was easily a 4-star book for me. I am curious what I would have thought about this book had I read it before all the hype, because after hearing years and years of raving reviews, it's hard not to have really high expectations going into a book, but I do really think it lives up. I did really enjoy it, and I can see how it's a favorite for a lot of people. It's incredibly well done, and I deeply cared about Evelyn Hugo by the end of this. It really felt like she was a real person. So if you haven't read this book yet, here's another recommendation for you, but have tissues on hand. But speaking of popular books, I finally read the Inheritance Game trilogy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This series has had so much hype around it recently. If you aren't familiar with the series, this is the first book. Basically in this, a girl finds out that she's inheriting a billionaire's entire fortune. But the weird thing is she has no idea who this dude is, and he has an entire family that he should have left that money to. But luckily this billionaire guy loves a good puzzle and games, so he leaves a bunch of clues for her and his grandsons to figure out exactly why he would do something like this. I read this whole series for my first ever reading vlog. If you guys are interested in following my journey through these books, I'll be posting that video soon. I know there's like 2 other books that are technically part of the series, but they take place after the events of these books, so I just read these for now. Maybe I'll read those eventually. But I really enjoyed all 3 books, especially The Hawthorne Legacy. I think I finished this book in like a day. The last book, The Final Gambit, I technically read this book in the month of March, so I guess it counts more toward my March numbers, but it was a really good ending to the series. It did take me more time to get into this book compared to the last 2 books. I talk more in depth about that in the reading vlog, but I do think this book wraps the whole series up pretty nicely, and I did enjoy the series overall and had a really fun time with it, and I really loved all the characters, so overall I think these books were a 4-star read for me. Also this month I read The Troop by Nick Cutter. This is a horror book about a group of Boy Scouts and their squad leader who go camping on this island when this man turns up to their cabin unexpectedly. This leads to an insane chain of events that have been seared into my brain. I probably will never forget them whether I want to or not. Everything and everyone in this book is described in such a disturbing and unsettling way that I feel like this book will stick with me for a long time. But I honestly don't know how to rate this book because this book is fascinating and I was hooked pretty much from the first page. And this is a horror book, like I said, and that's pretty much what you get. Disturbing, unsettling, pure horror. And I don't really read a lot of horror books, but I do watch a lot of horror movies, and the characters in those tend to be kind of one-dimensional. So I was really surprised how invested in some of these characters I was, and I really ended up really caring about some of them and not wanting anything bad to happen to them. Nick Cutter just did an amazing job taking us through the backstory of each character and developing them as the story went on. But that being said, this book is incredibly disgusting and gruesome. I almost had to put this book down a few times because it was just getting way too much. And there was this one part involving an animal that I just had to completely skip over because it was just way too much for me to read. But again, like I said, this book is a horror book, and horror and suspense is exactly what you're gonna get. So I feel like this book deserves at least 4 stars minimum. And just for another point of view, my husband also read this book, and he said for him this was easily 5 stars and maybe even one of his favorite books of all time. But definitely mentally prepare yourself before you read this book because it is a very challenging read, and I wouldn't really recommend this book if you're not really comfortable with gruesome and graphic content. There's also some problematic fat-shaming ways that these teenage boys like speak to each other or think about each other, so keep that in mind as well. And now for my favorite book of the month and possibly the year so far, and that's Dead 11 by Jimmy Giuliano. This one is another horror thriller book, but this one is way less gruesome. It's funny that I said I don't read a lot of horror books, but this one is more like thriller leaning, I feel like. This takes place on an island where everyone acts like they're from the year 1994. They even dress like they're from that time period and only watch VHS tapes. Specifically the O.J. Simpson car chase, they watch that every single night pretty much. The story is told from multiple point of views, but the main character is a man who came to this island looking for his sister. She had come to this island after finding something scratched onto her son's floor. Her son had passed away recently and she was trying to find if he had some kind of connection to this island. And this story is just fascinating, and I love how we're teleported back to the 90s, and it's so creepy. I had literal chills while reading this, and I just flew through it super fast because I had to know what was happening next. But despite how much I love this book, I think I'm only going to give this book like 4.5 stars instead of 5, because once the main mystery is revealed, I feel like they explain it over and over again, and it gets kind of repetitive after a while. And I was able to guess where the story was going pretty easily, but again, this is a horror book, so the mystery is important, but not as important as the horror vibes, which I feel like this book does really well. And I just love this book so much, so I definitely highly recommend it. I also did listen to this book as an audiobook, so if you're into audiobooks, I would definitely recommend listening to it in that format. It has a really large cast and is told through different mediums like text messages and letters and recordings of interviews, so it was a really cool experience listening to this book. But those are all the books I read in the month of February, and I'm really excited for the books I'm going to read in March. I hope you guys have a great reading month too, and I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you want to see more from me, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!